The NATO Summit, which took place in Warsaw from July 8th to 9th, clarified NATO's current position regarding Ukraine and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. For one thing, NATO did not speak of Ukraine joining the alliance, as it had done definitively at the 2008 NATO Summit in Bucharest. However, NATO committed itself to deeper and closer cooperation with Ukraine within the framework of its distinctive partnership with the country. NATO also offered Ukraine an unprecedented comprehensive assistance package, the largest amount of assistance in the history of the alliance, to help Ukraine enhance its military defense capabilities and, in particular, against the types of hybrid threats employed by Russia in the Crimea and the Donbas region. The NATO communiqué issued at the conclusion of the Warsaw Summit reaffirms NATO's position that it does not and will not recognize Russia's, quote, ongoing illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea, end quote. The promise of NATO assistance comes at a time of intensified fighting in the Donbas region. Over the past few weeks, heavy shelling, often from large-caliber artillery, banned by the Minsk Agreement, has taken the lives of dozens more Ukrainian soldiers. The former head of the Security Service of Ukraine, ex-defense minister and Ukraine's representative at the Minsk talks, Yevhen Marchuk, stated that one of the reasons for increased Ukrainian losses in the conflict zone is due to enemy use of long-range drones for precision adjustment of artillery fire. Marchuk noted that although these artillery bombardments are not massive, but rather very short and very fast, they are at the same time very accurate. Marchuk also stated that the concentration of Russian tanks and heavy artillery in the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine and the Crimea currently exceeds the number of tanks owned by the German and British armies combined. That is, 702 tanks and over 1,000 pieces of heavy artillery, based on information provided by Ukrainian military intelligence. Experts fear that such a massive accumulation of military hardware indicates plans for the further escalation of violence in Ukraine. Independent media and investigative journalism in Ukraine has suffered a terrible blow. On July 20th, prominent journalist Pavel Sheremet was killed by a car bomb in Kyiv. This act of violence has been interpreted by many politicians and political analysts in Ukraine as a deliberate attempt to destabilize the socio-political situation in the country. Born in Minsk, Belarus, Pavel Sheremet was persecuted in his home country for his principled opposition to the dictatorial Belarusian government of Alexander Lukashenko. He moved to Russia, where he worked for many years on Russian state television, while at the same time heading an opposition website, Belarusian Partisan. An outspoken critic of ever-increasing control over media in Russia, Sheremet moved to Ukraine after witnessing the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity in 2014. He worked as managing director of the prominent news website Ukrainska Pravda, Ukrainian Truth, whose founder, Georgy Gongadze, was viciously murdered in 2000. During an official press conference, President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, assigned head of Ukraine's national police, Katya Dekanoidze, to head the investigation of Sheremet's murder. He has also secured help from the West, from FBI experts and investigators from EU countries. Another chapter in Ukraine's corruption story is unfolding. Recently, rampant and egregious quality issues were uncovered in the food supply of Ukrainian army soldiers. Lab tests were conducted following numerous food quality complaints and a June food poisoning incident that affected 200 soldiers in the Desna Army Training Center in the Chernihiv region. These tests showed that the food had far fewer calories than the designated standard, and even worse, that it contained carcinogenic substances, E. coli and other bacteria, harmful candida yeast, and toxic fungi. The substandard comestibles were provided to the soldiers by a private company, in accordance with a 400 million hryvnia a year contract with the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. The ministry is investigating this matter and plans to legally sever its contract with the company. However, in the opinion of volunteers and independent observers, this problem is tied to corruption within the army itself, in the form of kickbacks received by army commanders and personnel for their consideration of the private services and their falsification of food satisfaction reports. Only continued anti-corruption efforts on the part of Ukraine, within the government, army, and society as a whole, will bring an end to such abuses. On July 11th, during the official visit to Ukraine of Prime Minister of Canada Justin Trudeau, the governments of Canada and Ukraine signed the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. The signing of this agreement was the culmination of a long process of negotiations. In July 2015, Canada and Ukraine announced the conclusion of negotiations during the working visit to Canada of then Prime Minister of Ukraine Arseniy Yatsenyuk, under Canadian Prime Minister at the time Stephen Harper. The trade agreement will create new business opportunities for and in both countries. For example, a major contract has already been signed between the Ukrainian aircraft company Antonov and the Canadian company Esterline CMC Electronics for the provision of aircraft parts and systems equipment, including for the Ruslan military transport plane, one of the world's largest. In the past, Antonov had secured such equipment from Russia. I'm Tania Stech, and this was Ukraine in the News.